All right, let me ask you, you all have copies of these questions?
No, they don't.
Oh, okay. All right, so I'll have to read the questions. The idea was for me to pick 5, and they're good questions, or sometimes questions that that don't seem to me to be particularly good, so I'm going to respond. I'm going to respond to the whole gang. There are 10 super questions with bunches of sub-questions appended, or 10 headings. And so I think the thing I'm going to do is just run through these and respond to them quickly. And then we can go back and clear up problems so far as they can be cleared up in the time we have. All right, what's the most beautiful place you've ever been that wasn't in Kentucky? I don't know. I've been in a number of beautiful places, but you can't, this business of most favorite, that's the next question. What's your favorite native tree or wildflower? I think those questions come straight out of Darwinian economics. You've got to have a first. Somebody's got to be on top. And first thing you know, in questions like this, you're comparing toes and ears. Some things of beauty are not comparable. We say they're incomparable. And so, how's your view of writing and poetry changed over the years? Well, for one thing, I've begun more and more to understand what a blunt instrument language is, and to try to be ever more discriminating and particular and concrete in what I'm trying to point to. But I'm feeling a lot of the time now very far out on the edge of the possibility of articulation. What advice would you give to someone who felt called to write and was early in their career? Read. It doesn't make any difference if you become a writer or not. It makes a lot of difference if you become a reader. And you should read things that were written before World War II. Go on back. I'm going to talk, I hope we'll get around to talking about the poetic tradition in English and what it conveys, what it carries, how vital it is for concerns that we have now. Above all, read the Bible in the King James Version. Learn it in the King James Version. I was just reading an essay this morning on Middlemarch, and the writer quotes a passage in which George Eliot virtually quotes the parable of the prodigal son, and the scholar who wrote the article doesn't recognize it. Just thinks that it's a different kind of language. Is there a theological thinker that has had particular influence? No. I'm no good at the one thing I've learned that I'm no good at is abstract thought. And one thing that I contracted early in my life is a kind of an aversion to people who talk as if they know a lot about God. I've traveled in secular environmentalist circles and Christian land stewardship movements. Could you share about navigating between these two worlds? No, I don't navigate between those worlds. I'd try to do my job, which is to make as much sense as I can. And those two worlds, I don't know what they are really, and I don't recognize them, and I'm not interested in them. Your lecture, it all turns on affection. How do we nurture this affection? I think that question gets it backwards. Nurture comes from affection. Affection doesn't come from nurture. Talk about the importance of imagination, bringing back a sense of respect and responsibility toward the land. I like to be a literalist to the extent that I possibly can. Imagination means seeing images, seeing pictures, seeing visions. So, as you grow in your knowledge of the land, of an ecosystem, it's going to have to be a particular place. You're going to grow in your ability to visualize that place and visualize the creatures who live in it and visualize the interdepending relationships that are so complex as to defy visualization, to defy imagination. Imagination is going to lead you to the limits of your imagination over and over again. The limit may be pulling back as you become more competent. What are the nuances, details that compose a specifically Christian place-based imagination, and how is this kind of imagination best cultivated and shared? I was waiting for that word nuance. You know, it's getting so you can anticipate it. It's coming. Because we're being very careful. Nuance means cloudy. Nuance and cognitive. Anyway, I'm not sure what a specifically Christian place-based imagination might mean. And I think I'm concerned always. I'm under the influence of the Bible, and I've been all my life. And it came a time when I really had to realize that's what I've got. That's what I've got. If I can't be served in my purposes by this tradition, and the biblical tradition in English literature and other literatures, but they're mainly in English, I'm going to be without help. A person who lives in Port Royal, Kentucky can't solve his problems by becoming a Buddhist. And this I've heard all my life, before I was born. My mother was carrying me off to church. I don't know when I was in utero whether I was willing to go or not. There came a time pretty early when I wasn't willing to be carried off to church. I know that. But I was hearing that King James Version. I was hearing the hymns and so on. And you know, I want this tradition to amount to something in our day. I'd like to feel that the Gospels amounted to something. But they don't amount to much as things now stand. And Christians have to bear a certain culpability in this because they haven't known what they meant by Christian. So maybe we'll talk about that. You talk about how affection is personal, green becoming more popular, etc. What do you make of this greening of our economy? In your opinion, is it possible to work within this industrial system to make positive environmental change? I don't think it's possible to work within the industrial system. I don't think the industrial terms can yield the solutions that we need. What I make of greening, I make of it whatever else turns up in advertisements. This is sub-language, like Christian sometimes is. It's language being used as a gesture. So I can say sustainable. Everybody knows then I'm all right. You know, my heart's in the right place. Individuals and corporations have rights in the U.S. What rights should the U.S. recognize in communities? Well, Of course, another one of our problems is that we've got a whole crop of new rights. Every time you turn around, there's a new right springing up. Well, we do have rights. If there's a right that's implied in our system, the communities ought to have the right, within limits, of self-determination. But that can be overturned, and it is readily overturned. In western Kentucky, there's a place called Land Between the Lakes that the TVA took under eminent domain, ran the people out, set fire to their houses. I was just reading a book on the Highland clearances in Scotland, same deal. When somebody powerful enough or rich enough wants your place, they take it. So if communities need to understand what they mean as communities, why they need to be self-determining, if they're worthy of being self-determining, and so on. All this needs to be talked about. Are boomers needed as well? Can't ambition be a driving factor for improving life and land through new technologies, ideas, or relationships? Well, I wish, but I don't think so. I don't think that we need all kinds to make a world. There are several kinds I can do without. And I don't mean that I want to kill them, but if the Lord should see fit. Was Jesus a boomer or a sticker? I love that. I don't know, it took a kind of genius to come up with that. Jesus was within very, very tight geographical limits a wandering teacher. And in his day, being a wanderer was something quite different, or a wandering teacher, something quite different from what it would be in our society. In a society that's interacting like popcorn popping inside a popcorn popper, everybody jumping around this way and that, a wandering teacher is of very little use. Jesus was walking. He rode on a donkey once, didn't he? Once. He was walking. So, probably a sticker, although the terms are wonderfully meaningless. So far, I've invested in 3 distinct places. I'm glad this is in here because I get mail about this all the time. Where I grew up, my college town, and now my graduate university. I grieve for the places I've left behind, but I'm also enriched by the places I've lived. You think there's a legitimacy to this mobility? Are there benefits that outweigh the costs? Maybe for a season in life? Good question. And if so, how do I invest in the place I'm in, given that I might leave it in a few years? The way things are, I have to be glad that my children, my grandchildren, leave for a while. Because I don't want them to get to be 40 years old and think that they might have gone somewhere else or ought to have done something else. Well, my son likes to remember his mother telling him, "You're leaving here, you know that, don't you?" he enjoys that now. How do I invest in the place I'm in, given that I might leave it in a few years? Well, that's a condition that defies imagination. How do you invest in it? That's like people trying marriage for a while, see how it works. If you're going to invest. Well, but you're college students, and you're going to leave in a few years. That's just the state of things in your lives now. So what do I say? Could I borrow from the Hippocratic Oath and say, do no harm? Well, then I ask you another question. How would you know? We can get back to that if we need to. Oh, Michael Pollan and William Cronin. I did read that interview in Orion. Observe that environmental groups often want to bypass the political process because decision makers should simply follow good science. Well, good science is a term we could examine at great length. How do you figure out what science is good? That is a question preoccupying me at present. Decision making should be expert driven by science and technology. Science and technology are unequal to the task, is why I'm worried about this. And this refers to my essay, Why I'm Not Going to Buy a Computer, and its list of criteria. How have you integrated science, technology, computers, solar panels, etc. into your life in a way faithful to your ethic? And I put a little exclamation mark at the end of that. How have I done it? Poorly. Awkwardly, uncomfortably, embarrassingly. I can use a team of horses, and I do. Got solar panels, don't have computer, don't have an answering machine, don't have any telecommunications devices except the telephone, don't have a TV, did I say that? There's some things that I can do without, but I'm implicated. I'm involved in what I'm against. This is original sin round 2. How can scientists conduct their science more artfully to ensure that it serves communities? I'm not sure what artfully means, but I think that in places like the Land Institute, which is really the only example I'm familiar with, scientists do accept a local context. And it's hard to believe that scientists out there in this romantic, quote, pursuit of truth, end quote, would destroy anything. Not the local ecosystem, not the local community. And we've had a lot of other scientists who are willing to participate in what we call creative destruction. Now, you're familiar with that term. Good Lord. What do you see happening today that gives you hope for the future of agriculture and land husbandry? Well, to name one instance, we wouldn't be here talking 10 years, 5 years ago, probably. The rural poor have some of the least access to healthy farm food. We got to talk then about what we mean by rural poor and access and so on. The great tragedy of rural America, or one of the great ones, has been the obsolescence, the workers being made obsolete by technology and being forced, often the rural poor, into urban situations, out of landscapes in which they did have a competence in subsistence. Black people who were simply replaced by big machines coming into the cane and cotton fields, had nowhere to go but the city, where a lot of them, especially the men, died. Ernest Gaines makes much of that and made much of it in the conversation with me. They died from drugs, weapons, foolishness, disease. Same for the Appalachian poor, forced out by their technological obsolescence into places that they didn't know how to be. Is urban agriculture a good supplement or substitute for traditional agriculture? I'm not sure what supplement or substitute means, but it's absolutely necessary. And it was a well-established part of urban life not so long ago. In the upper Midwest, cooperatives have played an important role in the agrarian movement. What role do co-ops play in Kentucky? Well, my father and brother were much involved in a co-op called the Burley Tobacco Growers Cooperative Association that combined price supports with production control. It came in under the New Deal, kept the small farmers on the farms in this part of the country for decades, many decades, 60 years probably. How do you see the church being a force of change for a sustainable local economy? It would have to get interested in economy. And it hasn't been. And in its, I don't know how this happened. Maybe some of you people understand the business better than I do, but somehow the Christian enterprise delegated economics to economists and corporations. We'll take care of the soul, you all handle the body. And Christianity gutted itself at that point. So it's reduced in its economic life often to doing nothing except feeding the poor, which is just not enough. A community is going to hang together economically because the community as economy exists out of mutual need, mutual usefulness. And that's why, in general, I prefer the community to the church, because the community is comprehensive in a way that the church has in its concerns and in the people it includes. If you could suggest to pastors one theological idea to stress in their preaching, what would it be? I don't think there's such a thing as one theological idea or one idea of any kind. We're back to that business of the beauty contest. Who's first? How does the gospel impact how you think about the environment? Ellen Davis at Duke has dealt with this issue with respect to the Old Testament, where the agricultural and ecological instructions are more present than they are in the Gospels. The thing that joins the Gospels to the so-called environment, a term I hate, is the principle of neighborliness. This is what we have together that we must share. This is the Commonwealth. You're in the Commonwealth of Kentucky now, which means nothing to its politicians. Does the gospel-centered worldview bring anything unique to the table that others do not or cannot? I don't know. That's comparative religion, and I'm not authorized to speak about that. I'm not sure what a gospel-centered worldview means. How does your firm commitment to place interface with the idea that we should see ourselves as strangers and pilgrims on the earth? How can you simultaneously be committed to working out the kingdom of God in a place-specific fashion while still longing for and not being satisfied with anything less than the ultimate fulfillment of it hereafter, I guess? Well, I have an instinct to resist these conventional dualisms of heaven and earth, creator and creation, body and soul. I think they've done a lot of damage. And but if you go to the Lord's Prayer, thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, I suppose people who pray that prayer and are unwilling to do all they can to make it come are lying, but who am I to judge? We have this word heavenly, which sometimes we apply justly to earthly things and earthly experience. Else, why would we know anything about heaven? Some definitions of heaven are just excruciatingly dull. Our economy is largely based on growth, implying for it to perform well, it depends on higher and higher rates of consumption. How do you see us moving beyond this model to an alternative one? What will this model look like? I don't know what the future looks like, and I would resist that. Take no thought for the morrow, remember? Herman Daly is a Christian and an economist and a person who's given really competent thought to the idea of a steady state economy. Some of the economists are critical of conservatives for assuming that there's some kind of analogy between household economy and national economy. I'm a little inclined to lean with the conservatives on that. I don't know. I'm a Depression child, and I grew up in the company of people who'd lived hard through that time. And the Depression in the country, remember, was not the 30s Depression, it was a 20s and 30s Depression. And there was a Depression in the 90s, a Depression in the first decade. They'd been through a lot. And so it's always a little strange to me to hear spending as a recommended solution for the economy. I was brought up to think that saving was an economic virtue. Some things seem to need to happen on larger scales. Watershed management should happen on a watershed scale. Hard to address global warming without considering the global scale. Well, one of my concerns is what appropriate scale is, and within what scale is the human mind competent. And my conclusion is it is not competent on a global scale. Watershed, a useful term, and we can talk about it, but the watershed of the Mississippi River is a lot different from the watershed of Emily's Run or Cane Run or Camp Branch. These are great famous watersheds that I'm familiar with. So what is the scale of the watershed to begin with? Why do you think the environmental movement in America has difficulty gaining traction in communities of color? Black communities, you'd mean predominantly, I suppose, and that takes us back to what I was already saying. You move these people out of context in which they can think competently about land, for instance, and you're calling upon them to have more imagination than probably they can have. What does somebody in the depths of a black ghetto in a great modern city, what incentive, what equipment do they have in their minds for thinking about the so-called environmental movement? What advice do you have for individuals and organizations involved in international environmental conservation and development work? Well, that leads me to the question, should I give advice? And my answer is no. I get a lot of mail. Well, I don't know what I mean by a lot. I get letters with some frequency from people wanting me to make up their mind, or help them make up their minds, or give advice on what they should do. I got a letter not long ago from somebody 19 years old who filled 5 or 6 pages with a list of things that sounded really inviting. What should they do? but no preference. Well, I gave the only answer I could. If you have something you really want to do, and you know a place you really want to do it in, you could probably advise yourself. But I can't. I don't advise my wife and family, for heaven's sake. I mean, I argue sometimes, but who am I to give advice? What you got to do, forget the advisees and think about what your job is, which is always to make as good, clear, solid sense as you can. So you don't say, well, here's what I think you ought to do. You say, I'll tell you what I think. You can make of it what you want to. Or farmers who work together, that I used to say things like, well, not bossing you or nothing. But if I was you, it's like people saying, I just love Alice Jane, you know, I just love her to death, but my writing resounds with calls to action. I'm not sure that it does. Well, making sense is not calling to action. People draw from what I've said the feeling that they ought to act, and fine. But that's not my business. After they've made their decision, that's their business. What call to action would you draw attention to this weekend? Well, I say after that one action, there's no such thing as one action. You try to, there's consequence. See, actions begin to pile up other actions. And probably you need several actions. This is why the university doesn't make very much sense. It's too divided up. There's no one department, no one that can answer any important question. If you really got to the important questions, what you do would be start a conversation among the different compartments. I've often struggled with whether I should devote my life to living out or bringing about my vision for a flourishing earth. Living out means living the life you think others should emulate. And bringing about means foregoing being a model and working 100 hours a week to be a constant advocate. Well, I think this just pulls the soul to pieces. I don't think that there's any way to resolve that except awkwardly. But I'll tell you, I think people who are advocating for something that they don't know anything about, that they haven't experienced, are apt to get out of control. And people who don't do anything, you know, if you get into the line of work I've been in, you're apt to run into people who don't do anything but demonstrate. Well, you've got to have a life. Edward Abbey said a great thing. He was invited to go to a demonstration or some kind of a public rally, and he said he was sorry he was going to go down the river in a raft. And he said, saving the world makes a good hobby. I love that. Saving the world would be a result, like going to heaven. It would be a result of having a good life, which the requirements of having a good life may put you on the street in the state capitol, but not, for God's sake, forever, and not every day. Yeah. You talk a lot about your move from New York to Kentucky and how many people thought this was downgrading your life. Many people claimed that farming or moving to a smaller area would hurt your career life prospects. I feel that similarly today, people do not respect the environmental wildlife profession as vital and important. How did you respond to these people back then, and how do you respond now? Well, I responded by going home. And there's only a very limited response that I can make now. How do I know that it wasn't a mistake? There are no control plots in your life. I have nothing to compare my life to. I don't have another life of mine to compare this life to. There were some astonishing things. I mean, when I came back to Kentucky from New York, where all the brilliant people were supposedly gathered, I came to Kentucky, and who was here? Harry and Ann Caudle, Harlan and Anna Hubbard over here on the Ohio River, leading their exemplary life. Guy Davenport, James Still. I had a list the other day. I don't know. I think there were more people on it. Thomas Merton. So Gene Meatyard, the photographer. They were here. Plenty. I mean, plus all the people in my family and my neighborhood who've been my teachers, some of them still my teachers, dead long ago though they are. So I can say that. What would I have found if it's easy to concoct a scenario. I could have been one of these university vagabonds, had 3 wives, but now I'm 4. But that's hypothetical, you see. I don't know what my wife would have put up with, how many wives she would have put up with. Well, all right, that's it.
45 minutes?
Didn't take long, did it?